Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining this webinar today. I'm James Llewellyn from Ipsos. I'm the shopper lead for the UK, and I'm joined today by Ninka Smit, all the way over in the Netherlands, who is in our Simstore team and is therefore an expert in virtual store research. Very warm welcome to you all. What we want to talk to you today is maybe you could even think about it as improving your shelf lives and getting that perfect recipe as per the invite for today of shopper, customer, i.e. retailer, and brand needs. The people on this webinar, we all care. We care a lot about retail, and we care about how to make it better. And we think that this game has changed. So the way in which you create better retail design has changed. I think retailers and manufacturers, they're used to operating in a certain way. And that way has worked. It's served its purpose for probably the best part of 100 years. But with all the changes that we see now out there in the marketplace, the changes that where tech is often the catalyst, it's changing that shopper behavior and are now becoming more elusive and harder to win. Shopper is more at the center, perhaps. They hold more of the cards. They're more in control than they once were. We want to explore that theme. We want to give you some ideas about how to cope within that new chaos. So here's the agenda for today's discussion. So the first one is exploring that theme. So why do we need to explore the shopper? What does it mean, explore shopper behavior? What does it mean to put shopper at the center of your decision making? I'll then hand over to Ninka, as said, our expert in virtual store research, who's going to talk about how tech is enabling sharper and faster insights. And we're going to finish by showing a quick case study of Simstore in action, really just to bring all of these ideas to life at the end. So firstly, we have processes. Category management is one of them. We have manufacturers on the left-hand side here. We have retailers on the right. And we have the shopper at the bottom, and they're all coming together. And they have been for a long time to form and create retail design. So you can think about retail as being the coming together of these three elements. But in the past, and this may strike us as counterintuitive or frustrating even in our roles, the shopper has not really been central to that process. But what does that mean? Well, I think it means that we, as an industry, we've often, I think, taken the shopper for granted, and we don't have that luxury anymore. We've created ways to shop that have suited perhaps us first and the shopper second. Probably the best example of this is the drive towards the self-service model, and probably hypermarkets would be the most extreme example of this. As an industry, we sold this way of shopping as convenient, in the sense that we described it as everything under one roof. But in fact, is probably, when you think about it, the most inconvenient type of shopping imaginable. We'll explain on the next slide why we think that. And so the shopper is not playing a central role. We have the shopper at the bottom. They're the kind of recipient of the retail design. In the past, of course, they feed back on what they buy, and there's a whole industry within research, obviously, which is about creating those retail KPIs and market share figures, for example. But we're not really learning in the past about shopper behavior, strictly speaking. So what people buy is, of course, the outcome. It's not the process or the inputs to that. So we want to understand the shopper at the bottom more deeply. Those of you who have met me before will know that I'm seriously lacking on hair nowadays. So you can think of the shopper as a little bit like James, if you like, perhaps a younger version and one in his shorts, gearing up for the holiday season. Anyway, moving on, I think in order to understand the present and the future, it's crucial to understand the past. Retail has evolved. It's gone through four huge seismic changes in the structure and the way in which retail environments come about. But it's taken 2.2 thousand years, so a couple of millennia, to get this far. Excuse me. The first big change that we want to reference on here is chain retail. which was documented in 200 BC. And this is the creation of chain retail, so replicable chain stores. It is arguable that actually the Romans created chain retail, but they didn't have the right paperwork in order, the Chinese did, and so they won that particular race. Moving forward, a long time, 1900 years or so, we have distance selling, so catalog-based mail order. Created somewhere in the vicinity of Europe. Again, the paperwork is not quite clear there. But you can think actually of e-commerce as having its seeds in that event. Distance selling, people are not at the retail environment. You're delivering against that need literally at a distance. No longer horse and carts, it's now drones and so on, but the same principle. And then thirdly, 1852, the first department store was in Paris, in France. I got into a little bit of an argument. I happened to be in Milan yesterday. I seem to be annoying the Italians with this story, because some of them were claiming that the first department store was in fact in Italy. But the details don't really matter. It's more about what these themes mean to us as shopper practitioners. And then fourth and finally, and probably most important, certainly to this discussion today, is the creation of self-serve retail. Which, as you can see from the dates, has been around for many years, and it really began to dominate what we saw, particularly in the grocery space, as the way to do retail in the 20th century. And this was actually painful from a shopper point of view. Again, it was sold in as convenient, but in fact it was anything but, because people had to get into their cars, they had to drive to the supermarket, they had to walk around the entirety of the supermarket or the hypermarket space. So the shopper was doing a lot of the work, whereas now, increasingly, the retailers, and by extension yourselves as predominantly manufacturers on the call today, are doing the work. It's almost thinking about it conceptually as a reversal. So rather than the shopper going to retail is needing to form around the shopper. So strictly speaking, there isn't a fifth innovation. Technically, e-commerce is derivative of distance selling, but certainly what we see as the case is that is an explosion of new activity and new ideas and new things that are being experimented upon. One of the things I think is really interesting, which turns to this example here, which is about milk, is in some senses we're going almost back to the future with some of these things. And what we're seeing recently in the UK and the US is the return of milk delivery to your doorstep. A very old idea, but being reinvented for the latest iteration of where retail is going. Yeah, milk delivery began a long time ago in the 18th century in the US. Then you had the rise of fridge ownership, the ubiquity of grocery stores, and it made it obsolete. But it's returning. Why is it returning? I think first of all, milk is important. You wouldn't think of it as a highly involving or engaging or interesting category, at least not to shop, but it's important to have it. If I reflect on my own personal experience, if anyone in the household discovers that there's no milk left or we're running out of milk, that is a crisis. That is a forthcoming disaster around the breakfast table the following morning. It's no kind of crisis because we have a convenience shop 100 yards from our house, but it's felt to be a crisis. You need to have milk in the house. Is point number one. Point number two is about sustainability, environmental concerns. So what we're seeing, again, with technology being the catalyst or the enabler, is, well, I think what's happened is that the past couple of decades, there's been a very, very vocal, but a minority of people generally who care deeply about the environment and sustainability and plastic packaging and so on. That's not new. But programs recently, I don't know if you've caught the Hugh Fearnley-Whittingstall stuff about the disastrous environmental outcomes of plastic packaging. It's starting to come into the mainstream. And the reason it can come into the mainstream, I think, is because of technology. You can just search, as I did recently, and it got me thinking about how many other people were searching in the comfort of their own home watching the TV, searching for milk delivery near me. In 2004, it was no one, and as you can see on the slide, it comes to a spike in June 2019. So this is, I think, a perfect example of all the chaos and the sort of new innovation and different things happening all the time, but also life coming full circle, I think, is another one that's interesting to ponder. So what can we do about that? How can we create the right frameworks, the right intelligence, the right research in order to get a broader basis of understanding around shopper? Again, not just what they buy, but also at times what they see, where they go, even their emotions, their missions, and the focal point for this presentation going forward, which is about understanding their decision-making process. So you'll all, probably most of you, if not all of you, be familiar with the philosophy of creating decision tree analysis, which is where we're going with this. But I do think even now, even though lots of manufacturers and retailers have done a huge amount of similar work in the past, you still, just through your own observation and through my observation, you do see sometimes quite a big difference between how the nature of shopper behavior and how that shelf in this case is being designed. Differences between those things create opportunities to grow the category and grow the brand within that, of course. So these three things from left to right. The first one is about getting organized around the primary needs. So think about it as when someone walks to the mobile phone category or the Mexican food category or the beer category, what are they deferring to first? Is it brand? Is it format? Is it price tier? Are they just looking for promotions and so on and so forth? Out of that analysis, you can also use that to optimize your adjacencies, which of course is your flow from left to right. Which subcategories have the closest connection so that they should be put together. And then thirdly and finally, and you'll all recognize this, I think certainly from a grocery point of view, it's kind of hard to think of any categories out there nowadays that don't have a small but fast growing emerging segment that's around the idea of craft, so craft beer as per the picture, or something to do with organic or naturalness, or has a sustainability angle. Decision tree analysis through Virtual Store can help to pinpoint what's going on with that segment, who is shopping it, what the drivers are allowing you to better play within that segment. So here's a simple example of a decision tree analysis, and there's two parts of this that we wanted to focus on today. The first one here is the behavioral element. So what we want to understand is the patterns of substitution within the category. What things do people defer to first? Is it brand? Is it format? Is it something else? And so on, right the way down to SKU level data, where we can pinpoint those maybe smaller and emerging segments. So in this case, in cereals in the US, in this example, brand is quite far down on the hierarchy of people's decision. People are deferring to either products that are marketed to kids or products that are marketed towards adults first and foremost, and other factors come beneath that. So we can identify that, which helps us with our merchandising decisions, but we can also use this type of shopper analysis for the purposes of innovation and pack design. So if we zoom in, which we can, on the natural segment, as illustrated in this slide, firstly, this is showing the benefit of combining the behavioral element that we get through creating the virtual shelf, asking people to make their first choice. We then deprive them of that in an out of stock exercise, not just because we're mean, although we are, but because we want to understand what people are loyal to. So we ask people to make a second choice, a third choice, a fourth choice, and so on. And that's how we get that wonderful detail that you saw on the previous slide. What this is doing is combining the attitudinal with the behavioral element, which you can do through the platform, and it's allowing you to zoom in on the bottom right hand side on what are the specific benefits of the natural segment. And it's of interest to me to note that naturalness per se is not actually the #1 driver. So it's there, it's 20% as you see on the screen, but actually in this case for cereals in the US, it's about the specific benefit, whether that's high fiber or protein content or whatever it might be. So moving on to some examples before we hand over to Ninka of categories that I think are in need of some TLC, some care and attention. So this is Mexican food, which I was looking at recently because, as you all know, having seen the original invite, I like to optimize my chili creation for my wife and kids at home. I think firstly on the far left-hand side, from my point of view, it makes sense, right? You've got the meal kits, you've got the highly convenient, high margin, high price point product. It makes sense for them to be first in flow and generate that high visibility. But the rest of the category, I think, could do with some work. Why? I mean, we don't know this because we haven't done the research, but the hypothesis would be that where you wanting to piece things together and do a bit of cooking as opposed to the ultra convenient option, you're probably looking for a base for your meal first, I think. So you're looking for either taco shells or you're looking for wraps or tortillas. Whereas I think this category, if you were to humanize it for a second, is getting a little bit confused because you have some of the tortillas in one place and other of the private label tortillas towards the top rather. Easier and more fluid to shop if all of these bases were together, and then you can move on to the sauces. Now, that was Tesco store in Aylesbury, near where I live. This is online equivalent for the same retailer. Now, you'd think in principle, well, surely the principle is true, that online is necessarily more flexible. I mean, it's ultimately personalizable around the individual needs and habits of that shopper. They know your backstory, they know your history, and so on. But you can't, in fact, shop for Mexican. Not really, not in the same way as you can do in stores. If you type in Mexican, if you type in Mexican food, it defers to the text. On the webinar today, we all understand why that is the case, but I do think there's an opportunity to make that category easier to shop. Moving on, it's not just the grocery space which is in need of optimization. I was shopping for a new smartphone for my 11-year-old daughter. Those of you who've been there before probably sympathize with that. Now the challenge is getting her to use it less, of course. I didn't particularly care about brand, and I don't believe that, again, we need to do the research to prove this or disprove it, but I don't think that most people are that wedded to brand, particularly when they're buying for a new user of the device of the phone. This merchandising looks nice. This is a PC World, again, in the Aylesbury area, but it's really making the strong assumption that you want to shop by brand, whereas you might want to look at other things. And unlike Tesco, again, this is the same retailer, but flipping into the e-com space, they're allowing much more flexibility. So you can play around with screen size, you can look at different capacities, operating system, and color. So a much more flexible way of shopping. But finally, it's a mistake, I think, to think that it's because stores are a static environment. Really, really tough to do multiple layers of merchandising within the same environment, because if you go from phones to laptops, I bought a laptop fairly recently, you can do things differently, right, through labeling or other types of merchandising. So primarily what we're looking at here is merchandising by operating system, but we also see other labels, and we have a whole different area which is illuminated in green for gaming laptops, and we have laptops that are labeled for achieve, for everyday, for social, whatever that means. So it's giving people different reference points. It's not just one primary way of merchandising. So there's always opportunities, I believe, to do things differently. Now I'm going to hand over to Ninka, who I pause for breath, and she's going to talk to you about how tech is enabling sharper and faster insights, and just giving some more detail on the Simstore platform.
Yes, thank you very much, James, for this very interesting introduction. I wanted to say that from everything that James has just shared with us, I think it's evident that the shoppers are more in control. We're in a new disruptive retail landscape, and we need to be on top of that. So shopper insights and understanding shopper behavior is as important as it has been for a couple of years. And we all know that shopper behavior is a lot of subconscious behavior. So it's good that we have the ability to conduct behavioral research. And of course, shopper research is absolutely perfect to do in a real life store situation, but that is not always possible either because of budget or logistics or a combination of those. So with the Simstore platform, we have a very, very good alternative, and technology nowadays makes it a lot easier to make virtual store environments look as good as real. So we wanted to give you a little bit of an update on our platform, because also we're evolving, and although most of the research that we've done up to date has been in 2D shelves, or as you can see in this slide we call shelf view, we're also evolving and are able to show full stores so that people can navigate through a full store, to look at signage, to see if there's any POS second displays, and we can test what is the best positioning, for example, for these displays in the store. And of course, we just heard that e-com is up and coming in a lot of sectors, so we can also replicate websites and do a lot of testing there, especially when you have initiatives that are not yet ready to go into store. It's really, really very handy to go and test certain ideas and activations online using a virtual store environment. This deck will be shared with you today after this webinar, and there are some demos in here. So when you receive it, please go and click on the demos, and you can really experience all of the different platforms that Simstore have to offer yourself. For the sake of time, I will now not demo it today, but I will give you a couple of examples of what our environments can look like. And I think, James, if you can click through to the next slide, we're all very much used to shopper research in retailers, in supermarkets or hypermarkets. So here you can see an example of the ambient juice shelf, where you can see all of the very lovely, colorful juices, which is looking really true to life. This is an ambient shelf, but we can also do a fresh shelves where we, for example, can have the doors which are in front so that it looks like it does in your own supermarket. And supermarket is something that we're really used to, but if we go on to the next slide, we can see that also other environments are very, very well in virtual store views as well. So for example, this is a makeup shelf, and I don't know how many women we have on the line, but makeup are always quite small, and it's quite difficult to put them in a virtual store environment and make them look real. But with modern technology, that's becoming more and more easy for us to do, and we get very nice looking shelves like this with very detailed little makeup products. And of course, we can also go outside of stores, and on the next slide I have an example for you of a vending machine, because that's also a very relevant point of sale, and something that some of our clients would like to understand a little bit better, how we get to decisions when we're in front of the vending machine. So just one of the possibilities that we can also do with our Simstore platform. And the next slide is actually one of my favorites. I don't know whether it's because beer is a very favorite subject of mine, but this is from a recent study that we have done for a beer manufacturer, going into the off-trade channel, where we were looking at different beer brands on tap. Also very much possible. As said, we have some demos in this deck, which you can look at yourself, at your own convenience. On the next slide, you can see an example of what we call store view, where you can go into the full store. There's arrows on the floor, and you can sort of move around. If you click on the demo, once you receive the deck, you can try it out yourself. And the same is true for the e-com environment, so the websites. There's an example here on this slide. If you go into the demo, you can actually click through, use some filtering, go into the product detail page, and see how detailed we can replicate websites as well. So a lot of technical possibilities to do shopper research in virtual retail environments, and yeah, we're really happy to help out. So if you have any questions or are thinking about any other channels outside of supermarkets or hypermarkets, we're definitely very happy to help. And I think there's a couple of minutes left, so it might be good if James can take you through a little case study of what we have done using our Simstore platform here in the Netherlands.
Yes, we will do that. Thank you very much, Ninka. So moving on and finishing with a short, quick case study. A real life example of a project of how we bring all these things together. So we were working in the Netherlands market in this case, and it was the olive oil category, and we're working with a brand within that. And the story, in essence, was a typical one, I guess. The category was again in need of some love and attention. We wanted to do new things with the shelf. We wanted to make it more interesting to shop. Even the benchmark that was in the client's mind was, but we want to make this as involving a process as wine. So that was the cerebral element, if you like. Commercially, we wanted people to buy more. Specifically, what we wanted to do is get people in the Netherlands market in that category to buy both olive oil for hot usage, pan frying, and so on, but also for cold usage, so dressing and this kind of thing, because we felt like there was a misunderstanding, perhaps. Again, this was the hypothesis that that they were, complementary products rather than alternatives. We wanted to get people into the habit and the mindset of buying a basic oil to cook with, and then a more premium oil in order to dress a salad and what have you. So we did a couple of things within the project, and it's a great example because we were able to follow it through to the sales result, which we'll show you in the end in real stores. So exactly the same concept as we saw earlier with cereal bars. You have the decision-making process laid out in front of you. So just very simply, to an extent, shoppers understood the difference between the two types of products, but because we were able to layer the attitudinal element onto the behavioural element, we were able to show that they actually saw them at times as being substitutable, not complementary, and therefore potentially bought at the same time. They saw the left-hand side of the shelf as for daily usage, and the right-hand side, as shown on the screen here, as for special occasions. So we had that decision tree analysis, and we also did some what we call planogram tests. So we had a control cell, we had some test cells, and we tried some new things. We won't go into because we don't need to for now. Ninka referenced it briefly, but the psychology of how people make decisions and autopilot behavior. One of the implications there, particularly for the grocery space, is that you need to be really short and direct with your communication, and we were super explicit in this example. So we spelt it out: choose olive oil for hot and cold usage, with some illustrations, some pictures of what that looks like, and then we repeated the sentence again towards the bottom of the shelf. And then finally, for the case study, it resulted in a 10% category uplift. So a big success story of how some simple changes based on virtual store research can generate some real commercial impact. So to conclude today, we see it's crucially important. Of course, we would as shopper researchers, but we strongly make the case for the discipline of understanding the process of shopping being at the heart of retail design. It absolutely has not been in the past. It's coming more to the fore, but we've seen through the examples that there's more work to do. Finally, it's been a great pleasure from behalf of both myself and Ninka to talk to you today. You can see our contact details through the emails. We're out of time. I'm sure that you are furiously scribbling on your notepads and on your laptops our contact details. You need not. We will send around a version of this presentation so that we can continue this discussion. We wanted to kick this off. It's kind of a launch within the UK marketplace of the Simstore capability. We'd love to join you for a meeting to discuss your needs further, or hop on a call, whatever is convenient for you. And we hope to be in touch soon. Thank you very much.